Hello and welcome to this Astranti Preseen video analysis series looking at the May and August 2021 strategic case study exam on airport owner and operator Arrfield. So quite an interesting case for us to analyse, but before we begin, just going to read through this COVID-19 statement that CIMA has provided. Now, this is a question that a lot of students have asked us over the past year with everything that has been going on, and CIMA have been asked the same question as well, which is why they have released this statement here. And essentially what it means is that whilst this Preseen and this case study has been created to reflect real life, the real world, etc., it's set in a context where there is no impact of COVID-19. And the reason for this is because COVID-19 is a bit of a special event, so to speak. It's not normal operations to have a pandemic going on. Most of your business life will not be spent dealing with a pandemic. So it's designed in a way that COVID-19 is not present. You're supposed to assume that it's standard normal operating procedures in a standard normal environment. So whilst they say here that if you do make reference to the pandemic or reference to social distancing, etc., if it's a good point, if it's worthy of marks within the exam, then you will be marked. As it says here, it will be marked on its own merits. However, the best thing that you can do is to assume that everything is carrying on as normal in a pre-COVID-19 world, because that is the context you are supposed to assume for this exam. You're supposed to assume normal working business environment. So hopefully that's clear, and hopefully you will be able to operate in the exam and also through your studies, through your watching of this video series, not thinking about COVID-19 because it's not supposed to be present in your exam. So let's take a look at the contents then of this Preseen. As I mentioned, it's on airport owner operator Arrfield, and we've got a very long Preseen here. It is at 37 pages in length. Now, that is the longest of any Preseen that I have seen, and I have been recording these Preseen analysis videos for about 4 years now. So there has been a lot of them, and I've never seen one that's really been beyond 20 to 25 pages long. So there should be a lot for us to look at, but it could also mean that there is a lot of content here which is giving you a lot of background about what an airport actually is and the actual functions of an airport, and it might not be all relevant for our specific role that we are playing within the case study exam, but we'll look at it all nevertheless. Now, this Preseen video series is going to be split up into 10 different videos. There are going to be 7 videos based on this Preseen alone. And the first video, the one you are watching right now, we're just going to look at the introduction and what it ultimately means for you as the student to how to approach these videos, how to approach the Preseen, the role that you are playing in the exam. In the second video, we'll then be looking at some background about airports and air travel and the different types of airport there are, whether you have hub airports, non-hub airports, spoke airports, etc., what the differences are of these different types of airports. Then in the third video, we'll look at the transport infrastructure, looking at the logistics and at how a company like Arrfield might operate, where they get their revenues from, and where they also earn their money from landing slots, etc., from the various different airline operators, as well as the air traffic control. Air traffic control, of course, being an important, very important part of operating an airport and dealing with the air traffic control organizations and associations. Then in the fourth video, we will look at the company itself, the history of the organization, the history of Arrfield, how it has grown, what number of airports are operated by it, and how it operates, etc. We'll then move on to the fifth video, which will be looking at the news stories. We've got quite a few news stories and articles, and these are really useful at giving you an insight into where the examiner might be heading, because often they will be linked around certain issues, certain risks, etc. And that can give us an insight into potential questions that might arise in the exam. In the sixth video, we'll then look at the risks within the organization before finishing by looking at the financial statements in the seventh video. And that will look at both the financial statements of Arrfield and also a competitor, Sky Lane. And once we have finished with the videos looking specifically at the Preseen, we'll then move on to the additional videos. The eighth video is going to be looking at the strategic analysis of Arrfield, so looking at it from a business perspective, looking at it with regards to where it wants to be, where it currently is, the strategies that it could implement, ultimately looking at a lot of the theories from the syllabus of the strategic level CIMA syllabus and applying that to the case. We'll then look at the top 10 most likely issues in the exam. And then finally, the final video, video number 10, is an industry analysis video where we're looking at real-world organizations that own and operate airfields and the kinds of issues that they are facing, and lots of various different bits of background information and research about the industry as well. So overall, a lot of videos to look at, but a lot of really important information, really useful information that's going to help you out in your exam. Before we begin, just going to give you a brief introduction into who I am and also how we are going to conduct this analysis. My name is Peter Steft and I'm the Senior Strategic Case Study Tutor here at Astranti and also the Masterclass Tutor for those of you who are on the course. And I have many years experience teaching the case study exam, including teaching the operational and management case study. So how it's going to work with this Preseen analysis, we're going to look at the Preseen section by section, identifying the key points and also applying relevant business models from the CIMA syllabus. We'll also be bringing up likely exam issues and some hints and tips for the exam day as well, looking at things that students often do that's incorrect or things that they do that they are correct, etc. And then we'll look at the strategic analysis, which is where we add in all those different CIMA models and apply them to the case, and also our top 10 most likely unseen issues. And what we'll do as we go through the Preseen analysis is I'll assume that you have no prior knowledge. So I'm going to assume that when you are looking at a particular paragraph in the Preseen during this analysis series, it's the first time you've ever seen it. We're not going to be applying knowledge from later in the Preseen retrospectively. We're not going to be applying material from the industry analysis, etc. We're going to look at it as if it's the first time we've seen it. Other than, of course, the CIMA syllabus. We'll be applying prior knowledge of the CIMA syllabus to the material. And we'll look through each section, make some notes on it, come back and we'll go through it together using my review. And some notes on the Preseen. The point of them is to give you context, because most of you watching this video who are taking the strategic case study exam will not be in exactly the same position as the senior manager in the case, which of course is the role that we are playing. You probably work in a different job, in a different industry, etc. You have no idea about their specific industry, or at least you may not have a very good idea about it. But of course, in the exam, you're expected to answer as if you were a senior manager in that specific industry. So the point of the Preseen is to give you enough background information so that you can make recommendations based on the organization's strategic position and based on what is logical and common within the industry. but do not write anything based on the Preseen, or at least pre-write any answers based on the Preseen, because ultimately you are being examined on your ability to answer the questions in the unseen on the exam day, which might be different than the material in the Preseen. It might go down a different route. It might even contradict it. But if you just focus on writing answers based on the Preseen, you won't be answering the questions correctly. So in summary, the Preseen is there to give you background information. But ultimately in the exam, you are answering questions based on the unseen. And we'll start by looking at the first page here, which is an introduction to the Preseen. If the Preseen is the context for the exam, this page is the context for the rest of the Preseen. And it's a very important page. It's a page a lot of students often skip. They skip ahead to the risk reports, to the financial statements, to the news articles, etc. But there's actually a lot of important information that we need to cover in this page first before we move on and look at the rest of the Preseen. So let's start by looking at the first sentence here. We can see that Arrfield is a quoted company that owns and operates 6 major airports. 4 of these are in the home country, in which Arrfield is founded and where it operates, and 2 of them are overseas. So there's a lot that we can break down from this sentence alone. First of all, we've established that it is a quoted airport owner-operator. Now, there are many comparators in the real world to this sort of company. Think about the UK, you have Heathrow Airport Holdings. Think about France, you have Vinci Airports. In the UAE, you have the Dubai Airports Company. So there are lots of different airports companies that we can use as a comparator. Again, if you think about the United States as well, lots of companies that own lots of different airports. So those might be useful companies to look at when you are conducting your research on the industry. And in addition to that, we can see that it is a quoted organization. Now, this means it's publicly traded on the stock market. Now, that is useful because there's useful information to know, because we know that they can use the market to raise equity funding, which is an important part of your role, is to source finance for certain projects. And if you know that the company can raise large sums of money on the market, I'm not saying it's as easy as that, but knowing that you can do that is useful information. It's also considered to be a strength to be a quoted company, because you can source its finance, because you are seen as a more prestigious and more respected organization as well. There's prestige in working for a quoted company. There's prestige in operating with a quoted company as well. But the downside of being publicly traded is often you have to adhere to additional regulations that privately owned enterprises wouldn't. There will be different regulations that you have to meet, different reports that you have to publish, etc., as a result of being a publicly traded company. You have to meet certain standards, certain requirements. Another interesting statement here is that they operate 4 airports in the home country and 2 overseas. So it means that they are doing business, conducting business overseas. Now, this also leads to additional complications potentially. Whenever you have overseas companies, you potentially have currency risk, where you're operating in different currencies, and this can lead to translation and transaction risks. For example, if you are converting currency or you're bringing currency back to the home country, then sometimes if the conversion rate of that currency is not in your favor, you can lose out also the value of your assets, the value of the buildings, the hangars, etc. in another country. When the value of that is translated into your home currency, then you can lose value on those assets. So there is a currency risk here, and it would be prudent of the organization to ensure that they are hedging against those kinds of losses, having currency reserves, etc., which is part of your role, your responsibility as a management accountant, senior manager working at Arrfield. Also, when we think about overseas relations, we have to think about our political environment and our economic environment as well. Some of those things from the Pestel analysis. Because if the country in which Arrfield is based, if the government of that country, which is Norland, a developed country, if that government were to fall out with the government of one of the countries in which one of our overseas airports is based, then that could cause problems. That could cause a lot of problems with us continuing to operate. It could cause problems with travel to that particular country as well. So we do need to think about political risks here and economic risks as well. If the economy were to go into recession in one of those overseas airports, and that could really affect our ability to continue operating them, or the value of operating in those environments may decrease, and we may need to think about moving operations or something along those lines. But in short, we do need to consider these external factors, because that can have a big impact on how we operate here at Arrfield. So as you can see, only one sentence in, and we've already brought out some of these potential issues. We've already brought out some of these things that we need to be aware of, some of these risks that may occur. In the second sentence, it talks about our role specifically. Remember that in the case study exam, you are playing a character. You are a senior manager operating in Arrfield's finance function. So you're not thinking about you, the student, in your current role. You are thinking about you as the senior manager working at this airport owner-operator. And CIMA provides a preamble for the role, and it's important that you remember this role and you play this role when you are answering questions in the exam. And part of your role is to consider strategic options for the organization, to think about what they could do, think about how they will deal with risks. You also have to identify risks as well, and source finance, and source appropriate financing, and explain why it's an appropriate source of finance, whilst also considering the needs of different stakeholders within the organization. So you almost want to think of it like a checklist of things to consider. Consider finance, consider risk, consider strategic options, and consider stakeholders. And this will cover a large proportion of the CIMA syllabus. Remember, you're expected to bring in your P3, your F3, and your E3 all together, tie it all together to help formulate your arguments. So another tip there is to make sure that you have revised, you have remembered the different parts of the syllabus, because you will be expected to reiterate things from those different syllabi. But it's not a test of your knowledge. It's not a test of your knowledge of the theory specifically. You will not be asked to actually conduct an options pricing. You will not be asked to conduct all sorts of complicated theories and things like that. You just have to talk about it from a strategic, a high-level perspective, the importance of risk management. But you're not going to have to talk about all the different parts of the COSO cube or the ISO 31000, etc., all those sorts of regulations. You just need to be aware of them and understand how you would use them. But also remember who you are reporting to in this particular exam, in this case study. You're reporting directly to the board, advising them on strategic matters and special projects. This is also important because remember, when you are writing your answers, you must provide recommendations. You are advising the board here. You are not giving them information so that they can then just go off and make their own decision. You are advising them on what you think is the right course of action. A lot of students, they often just put in a lot of facts, a lot of figures, etc., and they talk about it as if it's up to the board to do something with it. But think about the company that you work for. Think about the board of directors of the company you work for. If they asked you to do something, would they expect you to come into the boardroom to give a detailed presentation with a recommendation and what you think would be the best course of action? Or do they expect you to come into the boardroom with a huge stack of spreadsheets and facts and figures and statistics, throw it out all over the table, say, make something of that, turn around and walk out? Of course, it's going to be the former, and that's what you need to do here as well. You need to be influential. You need to provide conclusions and recommendations with everything you suggest in your exam. So that is your role. You need to consider the different aspects of the CIMA syllabus. You need to consider the stakeholders. You need to consider ethics as well, ethics being very important to the case study exam. And make sure you are influential and you communicate effectively. You always provide advice. You always provide a recommendation on a certain course of action. You don't leave it to the directors to then make up their mind. The directors will have several different things that they can choose from, and they'll eventually choose one, but they need your recommendation. Don't just give them the raw data. They need consolidated information with advice. Now, Arrfield is based in Norland, and Norland is a developed country with an active and well-regulated stock exchange. So that's important to know. Again, coming back to our Pestel analysis, thinking about the economy, thinking about who travels. Do people in wealthy countries travel, or do people in developing worlds travel? The average person in a developed country is far more likely to be going on holiday and going around using air travel, etc., or business travel than someone from a developing country. So that's important to know from the perspective of our business and our business model. It's far likely to be more successful in a developed country. But doesn't mean that we will not be affected by recessions, affected by changes in the economy as well. In the recession, the credit crunch, 2008, that did lead to a big reduction in travel, because it's usually one of the first things to go if money is tight. Going on frivolous holidays and going on airlines, etc. Particularly with regards to the more premium airlines. In the real world, if you think about the UK, you have your more premium airlines, your British Airways, and then you have your budget airlines, your EasyJet, your Ryanair. Now, these are far, far cheaper for the customer, for the passenger, so they must also be cheaper for the airline operator. The airline operator isn't going to pay huge fees to the airports when they're only charging a low price to the passengers. So for a company like Arrfield, they're going to need to have a balance of the more lower cost and the more premium airlines. You couldn't just have all budget airlines, because you would struggle to get the amount of revenue for them. You can't necessarily have all premium ones either, because the premium ones will want the better slots within the airports, the better flight times. They'll want the better gates at the airport as well. If you've been to an airport and you've been on a premium airline, you often find that the gate is next to the departure lounge. Whereas if you've got a budget airline, you might have to walk half a mile to get to your gate. So from Arrfield's perspective, they're going to want to have a balance between the premium airlines and the lower cost airlines. Of course, this does depend on the economy, and it depends on changes in passenger trends. There's been a move towards lower cost airlines in the last decade or so. And I've mentioned that as a threat, not because it's a huge threat to the very existence of airports, because low-cost airlines, of course, are going to need airports, but just because it will perhaps change the airport economy, where revenue is generated. Perhaps more revenue will need to be made through concessions and through freight because of the different needs of lower cost airlines. They're not going to be paying as much to the airports as the more premium ones do, because they're not going to be able to then pass on the low cost to their passengers. And Norland's currency is the N dollar, so we know there is an N dollar. And we don't know yet whether that is going to be a different currency to those overseas airports, or the countries where those overseas airports are based. But it's likely that they are. And that, of course, is going to link into what I mentioned earlier about there being perhaps a currency risk. But Norland does require the companies to prepare their financial statements in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standards. Now, this does make international business a bit easier, particularly if the countries where these overseas airports are based also prepare their statements according to the International Financial Reporting Standards, because it's so much easier to standardize your reporting across the different businesses, the different airports, different business units within these different countries. And Norland is a large country, so there's a chance for internal flights within the country. Think about it maybe in the context of China or the United States, etc., where you have a huge proportion of domestic flights compared with, say, the UK, where a vast proportion of travel is international because there is less need for domestic flights. Also, it is surrounded by sea, so that's also going to help to perhaps reduce the threat to travel in the future with regards to the airport industry, because it's going to be a lot harder to come to Norland by means other than aircraft. Of course, you could come by sea, you could come by boat, but it's not like where you've got Europe, mainland Europe, where you can drive or take a train from one country to the next. So as you can see, even with these 4 short sentences, we've been able to bring out quite a lot of information that we can build on throughout this video series. But before we finish this introduction video, just going to talk through some additional threats and opportunities that will face the airport industry and face Arrfield, as well as looking at some of the stakeholders of the organization, because we need to consider these stakeholders as we go through the rest of our analysis. We'll just get those on the screen now and we'll look at them in turn. So additional threats could be threats to security. Security, obviously a very big issue at airports. They have lots of security processes to check baggage, to check the identification of individuals. You have your metal detectors, your bag checkers, etc. Particularly in a post-9/11 world where there's often threats to airports through terrorist activities or criminal activities. So ensuring the most up-to-date security systems is imperative, both from a security perspective, but also from a convenience perspective as well. You want the tightest security possible, but you don't want to dramatically inconvenience the 99.999% of passengers who aren't going to pose any kind of security threat. So always making sure you have the most efficient, most effective security systems is very important, as criminals become more and more advanced in how they try to avoid security, etc. But also, you don't want to inconvenience the rest of the passengers. Data security, cyber security, very important as well. In fact, a issue that is somewhat relevant because it is an airline company, not quite the same thing as an airport company, but still within the same industry as such, was British Airways, that had so much information stolen, passenger details stolen, credit card information, details about the company itself, lots of it stolen in a cybersecurity attack. So it is a very real threat. So you have to make sure you have the best cybersecurity systems in place. And another threat that is really affecting airports and really affecting people's attitudes towards air travel is damage to the environment. Airports, aeroplanes cause a lot of damage to the environment, and a lot of airport travel is not really necessary, because business travel, you might say, is necessary, but what COVID has shown us, I know we're not supposed to consider COVID, we're supposed to pretend COVID hasn't happened, but what it has shown us is that business can be conducted over the internet. And this has actually been coming for a while. You remember the plane Concorde. Now, Concorde was a British and a French aircraft that could travel at incredible speeds. It was the only supersonic passenger jet. And people would pay thousands to get tickets on Concorde because they needed to get to New York and places like that very quickly because of business. Now, Concorde fell in demand because with the growth of communications, with the growth of the internet, there was less need for business people to be in places quickly because they could telecommunicate. And that is only going to increase. Technology is only going to get more and more. By the time that virtual reality develops a lot more, you may even be able to be somewhere without actually being there. If you need to visit the New York office, you can visit through virtual reality. So will that affect business travel in the future? And also holidays as well. Lots of countries depend on tourism and lots of people like to go on holiday, etc. But is it really necessary? Is it really crucial that you go to Tenerife to spend a week in the sun? Is it really worth damaging the environment because you need to go to Tenerife to spend a week in the sun or something like that? So there is a lot of pressure at the moment from a lot of groups, a lot of environmentalist groups that are targeting airports because of the amount of emissions that they produce and what impact that is going to have on the future of airport traffic. But there are opportunities as well. There is room for automation, growth through automation as well, cutting costs. A lot of airports have already experimented with much more automated baggage handling, automated security checks, automated boarding pass scanning, etc. Even the automated buses and things to take you to the aeroplane. And also there is a growth that has been predicted. In fact, according to the annual World Airport Traffic Forecast, it's going to be on average a 3.7% increase per year on passenger traffic. And this extends all the way to 2040 at this point. So there is room for growth within the airport, the airline industry. But what about various stakeholders? I mentioned earlier that part of your role is to consider stakeholders and to be aware of the needs of different stakeholders. And we do recommend that you consider all the stakeholders. Of course, you're not always going to be able to consider all stakeholders. You're not always going to be able to suggest something that is in the best interests of all the different stakeholders, because sometimes one will be at odds with the other. But there are some key stakeholders that we can pick out just from knowing about what an airport is, the likely stakeholders of an airport company. Now, of course, the big one will be the airlines themselves. These are the big primary customers of an airport. You need to keep them happy, particularly your major ones, particularly your hub type airline companies that are going to be paying millions and millions and millions to operate out of your airport. So you need to consider the needs of them, consider the power that they have, consider the buyer power of them as well when you think about your porters at Five Forces. And how easy is it for them to go to another airport or not? The likelihood is it's not going to be an easy switch. If British Airways decided they didn't want to operate out of Heathrow anymore, they wanted to operate out of a different airport, they couldn't just say, right, we're just going to stop using Heathrow now, we're just going to move to a different airport. We're going to move all our operations to a completely different airport from tomorrow onwards. It's not going to happen overnight like that. So it's going to be very difficult for them to switch and go to a different place. Also, we have the airport. If we are servicing a major city in a major country and we are the only major airport servicing that city, if they want to fly people in and out of that city, they're going to have to deal with us. So that is again going to reduce their buyer power. The government will be important as well, as I mentioned, particularly with regards to relations with other countries as well. If we're doing a lot of international travel, then the relationship of the governments of these different countries is going to be important. We're also going to perhaps rely on government regulations to allow us to operate. And also that can have an adverse effect as well, particularly with regards to the environment. If governments were to pass new legislation that aircraft can't take off or land between a certain time, then that could affect operations. Shareholders, that's a given. As a publicly traded company, we owe an obligation to our shareholders. We owe an obligation to them not to take risks unnecessarily. We owe an obligation to them to provide a return for their investment. Passengers. Now, passengers are a funny one because passengers are not necessarily directly a customer of us as the airport operator, but yet so much of what they do during their time at the airport is going to be based around what we provide as an airport operator. Whilst a lot of it will be going through the airlines themselves, it will be going through the airline staff. The airline staff will be checking them in, the airline staff will be checking their baggage, etc. But security will be handled by us. The general facilities will be provided by us as well. So we do have an obligation to keep those passengers happy as well. In fact, our airline customers will be relying on us to provide a suitable environment for their passengers. The bank will be relevant as well, particularly given any debt funding that we may have as well. We owe an obligation to them to pay back any money that we owe. Our employees are obviously very important to us as well. We can't operate without employees. We have a duty to keep them happy as well, to keep them fulfilled, to ensure that they are not exposed to any health and safety breaches, etc. An airport is perhaps a very dangerous place to operate, particularly those that are out in the actual runways themselves, filling up the planes and monitoring everything that's going on the actual runway. The security personnel as well, they are in the firing line if anything were to happen with criminal or terrorist activities as well. So making sure they have a safe environment to operate. Concessions are very important customers as well, or very important partners. If you think about an airport, you think about a departure lounge, you think about all the dozens and dozens of shops and cafes and restaurants, etc. that are in the departure lounge, they are all partners and customers of ours as well. We have an obligation to keep them happy. And they are a very important part of the amount of money that we generate, particularly if we are taking commission from the sales that they make. And some airports generate a huge amount of revenues from these concessions. In fact, Munich Airport has over 500 companies working at the airport. So the airport itself is one thing, and then there are 500 companies working at the airport in some capacity, including airlines, including concession stands, etc. So the employees of those companies are also important, and also keeping those companies themselves happy as well, because they are vital for revenue. And other regulators and associations, for example, I've got here is the Airport Operators Association, which is a community in the UK. It's an association of the various different companies that operate airports. And we are expected to abide, well, companies in the UK will be expected to abide by the rules of those associations. They're committed to sustainable travel and things like that. So if there is an association within Norland that Arrfield is a member of, then we'll also be bound by some of the rules and regulations of that association as well. We don't want to risk being kicked out of the association or anything like that, because that might have an adverse effect on our business. So there are lots of different stakeholders that we need to consider, and hopefully we'll be adding to that as we go through the Preseen as well. But what you should see is that there's quite a lot of things that are potentially going to come up here, quite a lot of external factors. We've discussed politics, economy, etc., changes in trends. We've looked at threats and opportunities for the company as well, for the industry. As we progress to look more specific information about Arrfield, we'll be adding to those strengths and weaknesses as well. But as we go through all of this, don't forget your role about identifying risks, about thinking about strategic matters as well, and also where sources of finance are going to come from. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you've got a good basis now to progress and review the rest of the Preseen. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. Just going to take a moment to tell you about the courses that we produce here at Astranti for our case studies. And all of the products that you see here are available as standard as part of the course, but they are also available for purchase individually. We have the Exam Technique series, which is a study text and a video series, which looks at how to plan your answers, how to read the material and analyze the material effectively, and to manage your time effectively in the exam, which is incredibly important. Most people who fail the case study exam fail it because of poor exam technique. So that's a really important video series for you to watch to ensure that you've got that technique. Because there is a specific technique to sitting the case study exam, and all will be revealed in that video series. And do head over to the website for more information about it. We then have our theory revision series, which again is a study text and a video series, and that looks at the specific theories that are relevant to the case study, because a lot of the material from the E's, the P's, the F's won't appear in the case study. It's only specific topics that are frequently tested in the case study. So to save you from revising all the E's and all the F's and all the P's, we've created a more condensed revision series to refresh yourself of the knowledge that you'll need for the exam. We then have our Preseen analysis series, which looks through the Preseen page by page, bringing out the important points. In addition to that video series, there is also a video that looks at the top 10 most likely unseen issues, and also the strategic analysis video, which takes all the key models from the CIMA syllabus and applies them to the case. We then have our industry analysis pack, which is a large document that looks at the industry that the Preseen is based on, looks at all the real companies that are actually operating in that actual industry in the real world, looks at how they market, what the suppliers are, what the key stakeholders are, how they operate, industry trends, and also a series of industry examples that you can use and reference in your exam. And we've got sample paragraphs to show you how you would use it in the exam, and that's a document. There's also an accompanying video with it. We have our mock exams, which are based on actual exams, but they feature the reference to the actual case, so they're on the actual case that you will sit the exam on. We've done our best to make them as close to the actual exams as possible, and you can actually sit those online in an online system that replicates the one that you'll use on the exam day. So you can really test yourself under exam conditions, and we provide marking and feedback for those mocks as well, where you'll get a tutor that will analyze your script and will give you a comprehensive document providing you with information not only on your actual script, as in whether you passed and failed and what you should have brought up and what you shouldn't have brought up, etc. But we'll also give you an appraisal on your technique as well, how to improve your exam technique. We then have our question packs, which is a series of shorter mock style questions based around the core activities. So if you find that you really struggle with certain parts of the CIMA syllabus, that will be a really good way for helping you. For example, if it's the core activity A's that you're always struggling with, or the B's that you're struggling with, you can look at the specific core activity A pack, which will give you questions based on those subjects. And then we have our masterclasses. We have 2 live all-day masterclasses, one at the start of the course and one at the end of the course. The one at the start of the course will give you all sorts of hints and tips on how to plan, how to use your time effectively. We'll also go through the planning process live, which will be really helpful for you as you progress into your mock exams. And then we have the revision masterclass right at the end, which looks at everything you've covered, gives you a refresher on everything you've covered over the 6-week period, and that's going to be really useful for giving you those little extra hints and tips to get you the extra marks in the exam. So do head over to the website www.astranti.com for more information about those, and I hope to see you again for the next video.